Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. My name is Jared Budlong. I'm running as an independent candidate for governor here in Alabama, and you are watching one of our campaign meetings. This one is about policy. Specifically, this week, we're going to be talking about the prison system or the slavery system we have in Alabama. So if that is of any interest to you, then I encourage you to hang out and chat with us. If you're watching this afterwards, feel free to still use the comments, and we will reply to those as quickly as possible. It may come in another video reply or something later, but do use the comment section. We do read those. So TikTok, please use the Q&A feature. That is the only way we're going to keep up with comments. Again, try to keep it focused. We're talking about prisons in Alabama this week. So the purpose of this meeting is actually a little more focused than we typically are on these meetings. And we have a town hall coming up on August 3rd, and I believe it's at 8 p.m. Taylor, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's a town hall. What's that?
I said that's it.
That's it. Yeah. So August 3rd at 8 p.m., we're going to have a town hall with a bunch of people that are currently impacted by our incarceration system. So that could be people who put in questions that are currently in the prison system, family, friends previously in the system and are still being impacted by decisions made by our state, all kinds of questions that are going to pop up. And we've been thankfully given some of those questions ahead of time, because they're common questions that get asked, and rather than being thrown a softball or a curveball, they're tossing us a softball, and we appreciate it. So we're going to try and come up with coherent answers ahead of time for those that we have answers for. So that's kind of the purpose of this question, or the purpose of this meeting rather, is to answer these questions. And I think we're just going to start at the top. So what I'll do is read the question, and then any qualifying made with it, and then if we have a thought on it, I'm going to pop it out, and from there I want this to be a discussion. So that includes everybody who's watching or commenting live. Please use those features, and we would love your input on these. So let's jump into the first. Will there be an implementation of an appeal for denial of parole or pardons? At present moment, there is none. There's the fact that a grand jury indicts on everything, mainly because the accused are not allowed to tell their story. This should also be changed because their personal account would shed light into those that are innocent and end up in prison because of a plea deal. I don't have an immediate response for this one at this point. The thing we need to look into is the state code regarding the Pardon and Parole Board and what rules they have to follow, and if that's their own rules or if it is something that is written into law. The Pardon and Parole Board, for anybody who is not familiar, is an appointed board by the governor. The caveat there, and it's a question that comes up later, so we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the caveat is the governor has to pick from a predetermined list, and that list is chosen at present by the lieutenant governor, the Speaker of the House, and the President pro tempore from the Senate. So essentially, the legislature and the lieutenant governor pick the 5 that the governor can then pick from, and they are, they're on like a 6-year term. And when an office position rather, or a board position becomes open, the governor can then select from the positions or the options presented by that group of 3 people. So that's kind of where we're at. The weird part is they are basically in control of pardons and paroles, like the decisions at least. The part we need to look into, and unless somebody here has more insight into those, we'll just put it as a research piece, like, hey, look into what rules they have to follow, and if that's something that can be affected by, let's say, the director of the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, and that is something I can, that is a position that I actually implement, or appoint rather. So we can have some say there if that person has influence. So we need to look into that. And I don't see any comments coming in on either TikTok or Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube around that specific question. So anybody who's live on the call, if you have input, please say so. Otherwise, we will move forward into the next one. Momo, we're focused on policy tonight, talking about prisons. I appreciate the question. Somebody please write that one down. We'll talk about it later. Thanks. Next question. How will we prevent the drugs from getting into prisons, and what guidelines will be implemented? My initial idea, Momo, no worries, it's fine. My initial idea is to have an open reporting mechanism that both staff and those who are currently incarcerated can report any incident of drugs being brought into the system. And the caveat there is we have to have that sent to a group that isn't a part of the ADOC, the Alabama Department of Corrections, to avoid corruption. So one of the pieces that I want to include in that is potentially finding a federal office to pair with, to say, hey, this state department or group or commission gets those reports to review, and at the same time they're also sent to a federal office. And then that way there's something here in the state that I have oversight on, but also in case when I'm no longer in office, because that will happen eventually, there is a mechanism for oversight and a check and balance in that regard. Any thoughts on that there from anybody who's watching or live in the group? Any holes in that plan? Momo, yeah, essentially a two-filter system. Yeah, it's not really filtering. It's more just so that multiple people can see the reports as they come in. It's not trying to filter out things necessarily. We want the entire that raw feed to go to both of those departments, but it's more of a way for double oversight. So, Chris, former officer, and you agree with me? Awesome. Yeah, and if you have any insight, especially having been in there in the past, that's what makes the most sense to me, is you've got to get it outside of the ADOC just for transparency and for avoiding corruption, for lack of better terms for it. We got to find a way to get that reporting outside of the system, but still under state oversight, and then the backup being federal, because we know that they are already looking at our state. They're waiting for the lawsuit to happen in 2024. So having some extra info would not be hurting us at that point as citizens. I'll say it that way. All right, so we'll jump to the next one. And what about pay for those who are incarcerated for jobs they would be doing on the outside? The extra little bit of information that was given was they could literally pay off restitution for, or at least for some, they could help pay off restitution, and finding some kind of compensation scale for inmates. So currently we do have positions available for those who are incarcerated to be paid for their labor. Most of them are, at least the internal ones, if they're working for the state still through something like ACI, it is pennies on the dollar, 15 to 25 cents from the last report that I could find, because we don't have transparency there from anywhere I could find, at least. Chris, you mentioned the work release. The concern that I've seen there is the minimum wage, federal minimum wage, is kind of the go-to for those. They just get paid $7.25 an hour, and on top of that, a part of that income is then immediately siphoned off back to ADOC, and then you also have taxes taken out on top of that. So it ends up being something like $3 or $4 an hour for that work as well. And that's not nearly enough to actually save up and pay off any of your fines or fees or restitution if it was something, if you got convicted of stealing, nothing like that. It's not going to be enough to pay those off. But also, not a lot of those positions are available. If we have 26,000 people that are in the system, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's a very small percentage. A very small percentage of those who are incarcerated who have the option to do a work release type program. Robert asked a relevant question. Are you willing to make all prison work $7.25 minimum? I assume you were talking about all prison work, not just the work release, but $7.25 at the least. If we want to be pie in the sky, long term.
The ADOC doesn't take half of.
Well, pie in the sky long term, they'd be paid what it's worth in the free world. Like they would just get paid that because they're doing that work, and it would do nothing but help us pay off the fines and fees that we're putting on top of them, which some of those are ridiculous. So it's a whole other conversation. But yes, Robert, 725 at a minimum. Ideally, would be what that job is worth in the free world. So let's see. So my thoughts on that specifically was that those real wages, so $7.25 an hour is a minimum, would go into an account that they potentially have control over. I haven't figured out how I want that to work. I don't have any thoughts on that yet, because you do still have to purchase things inside the system. So really, part of it's going to depend on how the rest of this gets taken care of. But it's either something that can be saved and used upon release, or something that can be used for specific things while you're inside the system still, stuff like the commissary and things like that. Tish, welcome to the stream. We are currently talking about pay for those who are currently incarcerated, in an effort to get them back on their feet once they leave, but also to pay off fines, fines and fees, rather than the state forfeiting, or taking in forfeitures. So
Part of me feels like, saying, okay, a percentage will go to your commissary account and a percentage will stay in your bank account. But then the other part of me is like, it's their freaking money. Let them do what they want with it.
Yeah. Chris said if it goes to a prison account similar to the commissary, then that account can be cashed out when they leave. Yeah, what I would like to see happen is something that is accessible to a predetermined, or a predetermined person by the incarcerated individual. So that way, let's say it's a father who is currently incarcerated for something they did, and they are working to continue to pay off fines or whatever it is, but they can also let their family have access to that so that they could continue to pay monthly bills or anything else. Because a part of the problem that people don't discuss generally is the damages that are being done to the families they're being separated from for years upon decades, right? So that's another part of it, is not just a commissary account, because that's helpful for them, but there's only so much you can get from the commissary. And if you're earning actual wages, then having that in a place that could benefit those you care about, I think would be beneficial. Let's see.
That's a good point that I have to admit that I never thought about. If you go from a 2-income home,
yeah,
because even a 2-income minimum wage home is not enough.
Right. Even in the most economically friendly county, as I call it, Franklin County. Jolly.
So the answer may legitimately lie more so if we would look at examples in other first world countries. The answer may be there because they have far different systems of how their quote unquote prison systems work. So that may be worth examining to maybe get an idea of better how to manage that situation.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they even see, and this is where Tish, if you have any input, that's why I really wanted you on this call. So thank you for joining. If you have any input on other systems that are doing, a lot of the other places we're looking at don't treat their prisons like we do. They don't treat them as punitive punishments. So I'm not even sure if pay even happens. So that's something I'm not familiar with. In your research, have you found any countries outside of the U.S., right, that are paying their incarcerated individuals?
Actually, there are many countries that are paying people while they're in prison to do work for the prison, as well as there are many states within the United States that are also paying people to work within the prisons, such as Colorado and Alaska.
Okay. For later, you don't have to do it now, but if you want to forward that, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to do it now, but we will, hopefully, one of us will take notes on Tish sending that stuff. I can type that up real quick. So Tish, send.
Yeah, I worked in Alaska DOC, and they pay their people to work.
Cool. I like that idea. The other thing people are going to bring up, and it comes up later, is how is all this going to get paid for? So that's something we'll have to figure out, right? Because we already don't have a whole lot of money to start with, but that doesn't mean we don't come up with a plan and then find a way to fund it, because that's where my head is at, is let's come up with a plan and then figure out a way to fund it, because that's how you approach general welfare things. You don't figure out how much money you have and then go, all right, well, who gets screwed? Right. Jolly, you put your hand up, and then Keisha, I'll answer your question also.
Well, the line of thinking there is that you kind of have to get down to the bottom of the problem, and you have to look at the misappropriation of funds that we do have and where it's going, and see if you couldn't reallocate those funds. Because to me, that's a very simple tactic. It's like, okay, do we really need this for this, or could we reappropriate that to something else? I mean, looking at how do you pay for it?
Yeah.
I mean, look at the country as a whole, and where we put our money. If we put it back into our own country, to help people will be far better off. So maybe we need to look at how funds are allocated first and foremost, and that would help to solve the problem, perhaps.
Yeah, before coming up with additional revenue sources. Yeah, 100% agree. Transparency with what we have access to would be nice, but part of that may have to wait until we get into office to figure out what our actual options are. So Keisha, this question comes up a lot, and I'll answer it because it's important that I answer it every time it comes up. I'm not going to push for a lottery because I don't. That system, a state-run lottery to help fund things, is putting an extra burden on the impoverished part of our state. So I'm not a huge fan of it. If somehow the state, as a population, not just the legislature, but if the state as a population says, hey, we all want a lottery, then sure, let's talk about it. But I don't think that's the best way to bring in funding, is to take it from poor people, because those are the people that get affected by the lottery the most, percentage of income wise. So that's my little bit of pushback that I'll give. And I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat, so let me jump back over in Facebook, because I just noticed there's a bunch of messages. Make sure I didn't miss anything from what we've been talking about. Amanda, is that why Alabama keeps their minimum wage at 0, so they can choose to pay prisoners pennies to nothing? I don't think that they would be required to pay incarcerated people more than 0, even if the minimum wage was 0, because that's a different. You've lost rights at that point, so we could just say, hey, you've lost your right to minimum wage. Like, I have no doubt we could just do that if we had a better minimum wage. So let's see. Everyone who's sentenced to ADOC has fines, so that's something still to consider. Regardless of crime, they're still getting fines. And Alice mentioned an article, so we'll have to take a look at that later. Let's see. And then all right, cool. Let's see. All right, so we'll jump back in. So I think we're good there. So Tish, I'll look forward to seeing some of that stuff from other countries and states that are currently paying their incarcerated individuals preferably more than $3 an hour, which is essentially what we're doing. And there's another question on TikTok about working on a community impact bail index. That's actually a question that's going to come up later. So Robert, I'm not ignoring you, but there is a question about bail that comes up later. So I'll try to address that then. And if I forget to address Robert's question when we're talking about bail, somebody remind me. We'll jump back in. Let's see. We have to do something about the food. Perhaps an honor dorm or the honor dorm can grow vegetables to allow them to have fresh fruit and vegetables, something that would give them purpose. I don't like the way the description or the extra little bit is phrased. It sounds like we're trying to go further back towards slave labor rather than away from it. If we're forcing you to be somewhere and you don't have a choice, we should be feeding you. If you're going to be growing it, then you need to be paid for it. So I guess there's a small caveat with, if we're gonna make them grow their own food, we're gonna pay them to grow that food and do that. That's my gut reaction. Does anybody have any immediate feedback on that part? Let's see. People who are well off rarely gamble. Yeah, exactly. And then, so here's the thought. Too much money can make you seem rich in Alabama. It can cause violence and make you a target. How can we migrate this and maybe past this point? And the Department of Corrections. Oh, you're talking about people who have like a larger account. Yeah, that's a good question. Tish, I'm not sure. We're back to the pay piece because I didn't see your question come in. It's a good question. Jolly, I think you have input, so go for it.
All right. So I know that in some places in Alabama and probably across the country, sometimes sheriffs or their administrative staff or whatever will get to keep the excess from their food budget if they don't spend all of it. Right. If we nix that, then guess what? There's more food in people's bellies, better quality food in people's bellies.
Yeah.
If we nix that. So that's a good place to start in my mind.
Yep. So because that happened at, I think that happened at Holman. Wasn't it like $750,000 that the warden pocketed based off of not using the full budget? Does anybody know which one that was?
I don't know, but that is disgusting.
Oh yeah, no, it was
disgusting.
Pickens County. Chris said it's Pickens County, so it was not Holman, but because that's here. Holman's still in. Oh, that might be outside of Baldwin. I don't know what county that is. It's right near me though. I don't remember what county it is.
Baldwin.
It is Baldwin still. Okay. Yep. All right. So Jolly, you were saying to review the spending budget and requirements to spend so it doesn't end up in someone's pocket. It doesn't end up in someone's pocket. Morgan County. Cool. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that happened, and I didn't realize there was 3 other cases, or 2 other cases, 3 total. Not surprising, but again, just didn't realize that it happened. So make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's see. If you're making prisoners grow food, feed themselves, that's not sustainable. Just feed people. Yeah, like relying on the food that you're growing in a very specific climate seems problematic on its own. But I'm not opposed to that being a thing they could do. Just they need to be paid for it. I don't think it should be the only thing that sustains them, though.
Norway has the lowest recidivism rate. Just throwing that out there.
Norway.
For future research. Norway.
Oh, Holman is in Escambia County. Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate it.
I said that.
Oh, somebody put it in the comments too. So and on Facebook. So everybody's. This is why we're doing this stuff live, by the way. Like the point is, I don't know everything. We're doing this live so we can all have some input and get our correct info and have everybody's input. So anyway, thank you for being here. Next question. We have stopping vocal and the DA's office from blocking those who are trying to come up for parole and make sure they follow the guidelines that are in place. And I know that there was a bill that was presented last session to try and implement an oversight board, essentially, to legally require the Board of Pardons and Paroles to follow their own guidelines, and if they don't, provide a reason. Because one thing that is infuriating, the current way it's set up, if you are denied your parole or pardon, the board doesn't have to say why. They do have to say why if they do pardon you or give you parole. And like that, to me, like, that's yeah. So oversight board, we have to figure out how to do that correctly so that it's not just a suggestion. And I think working with legislation is going to be the best bet there. I don't know how likely it's going to be to happen, since they tried it last year and it didn't pull it off, unless everybody gets out and votes and brings in some more progressive legislators. So any thoughts on, is anybody not familiar with vocal? Because we should mention what that, at least my understanding of that group, I'll say it that way. I've recently been made aware of who they are. So if you're not aware, vocal is a group that is posing themselves as an advocacy group for families who have been affected by people who are currently incarcerated. So, an advocate for victims' families. And they are very vocal about keeping people in prison. And there's allegedly they are doing it potentially without even talking to the victims' families at times, where they're just bringing in what they want to say and saying it and say, oh, we spoke to so and so. So again, my follow up there would be if there's some way to require some kind of reporting to show that they actually said it, because I don't want to get into the idea of banning groups from standing up for either side, because that's limiting. That could be abused in the other direction. So I don't think blocking them entirely is a good idea, but finding some way to keep them transparent and honest, that's my immediate idea. If actually Alice is agreeing, equitable and transparent policies among the board. And I think for the groups, if they are not directly related to the victim, like there should be some way of indicating that they actually spoke to the families. I don't know if there's probably a downside to that, but I can't think of it immediately. Can anybody think of any obvious ways that requiring transparency for any group that wants to speak on behalf of either party, who is not legal representation and they're not family, having some kind of transparency to say that they actually spoke with that group? Is there any downsides you guys can think of offhand? Because Jolly, go ahead.
I think this is a very general issue when you're talking about transparency.
Yeah.
It's always fear of being lashed out at, some kind of backlash. I think that's just a very general problem when it comes to transparency. You would think it's not a big deal, right? But when you have your laundry airing out to dry in the front yard for all to see, that can invite potential issues. And I think people are generally just afraid.
Okay. So I guess when I'm thinking some kind of transparency, not necessarily a request or a required public live stream of their conversations, but something that shows, some way of authenticating they actually had discussions with the family, and that can be abused. I get it, but some extra step, because from what I understand, there isn't that currently. Yeah, Alice brings up it's time consuming and there's potential conflict and adding litigation. So there's the potential complications, more red tape that people have to go through, which could cause problems for groups that are legitimately trying to help those parties. So, yeah. Okay. So for me, it's just gonna have to be tied back to the transparency of the board and their guidelines, and finding a way to force them to actually report back why they're blocking it, why they're blocking either parole or pardons. And again, the legislation's already been proposed, so following along the same guidelines. I didn't see anything when I reviewed it. I didn't see anything bad that I would go against from that bill that was proposed. Nothing stood out as problematic, requiring them to follow their own guidelines. That was literally the gist of it was, hey, we need to implement something so that you will follow your own guidelines. And it's a temporary, I think it was a 10-year group that can always be extended. But, it's a group that's like, hey, for 10 years, whatever it is, we're going to have an oversight on the board to make sure they're following their own guidelines. And if they don't, they have to report why. And generally that all seemed like a good plan to me. I didn't see any reason not to do something like that. So, yeah, definitely not an excuse for transparency, Alice, but understanding that there's potential litigation issues when you start adding extra red tape is something to be concerned about, for sure. Cool. So I don't remember the name of that bill, so look up bill for oversight board from 2022 session. And we can look into that later and get the actual research to form that coherent reply between now and August 3rd. So, parole officers on the outside that do their jobs or to help released individuals. So I'm not super familiar with this situation. So if anybody is, including Chris, if you have any insight into what they're talking about here, is it corruption or is it just apathy? Because that's what I'm not sure of. Either way, my gut instinct is to go into having some kind of incentives, potentially having it as a position available for previously incarcerated individuals, right? Because that's something we would have control over. We would understand their history, and potentially leaving that as somebody who's been in and understands the importance of that role. That there's always the concern about somebody who was previously incarcerated taking advantage of the system. We'll have to worry about that. But that's my immediate gut direction, is to add some kind of incentives for those who are currently in the position, and then opening that up to people who understand the importance. And for me, that's somebody who's already been in the system. So if anybody has any feedback, I would love to hear more voices than just my own. It would be great.
Can I just speak up on that real quick?
You can.
So
That's why you're here.
You're asking, should parole, what? Okay, could you phrase that differently?
Yeah, so they've got parole officers that are on the outside. So they're on the outside, and they're supposed to be helping people who are on parole, and they're not doing their job, evidently. I don't know. I don't know that the extent. The question literally is in all caps, and it's just parole officers on the outside that do their jobs to help release individuals, or help released individuals, rather. And that's all the context I have. So my assumption at this point is that there are parole officers who are either apathetic and just not doing their job because they don't have to, like there's no incentives there for that to happen, or it's corruption, one of the two. So I'm not entirely sure what the actual issue is. I don't have any details yet. My gut reaction, though, is to add incentives. Not sure what those are off the top of my head. I don't think money's a great incentive to do the right thing. Doesn't usually show that to be the case. But also adding that position for previously incarcerated individuals, people that have served their time and are back into the free world as a job. So that's where I'm heading, at least.
I think those are some good thoughts, and I think that I've seen parole officers work in Alabama and other states across the U.S., and there is a supposition of power that occurs.
Okay.
They feel powerful, and that's one of the main reasons that people get into this work, is to feel powerful, and to feel. I think if you were to take away that power dynamic, then you could be onto something, and that can include people who were previously incarcerated. I'm going into that. I was a parole officer in Texas, and I thought, man, I hope you don't mind me cursing.
No, you're good.
I'm gonna be a badass.
Yeah.
And yeah. So there's a lot there.
Yeah. And Chris, you bring up a good point. You can't just let anybody take the role. Completely understand, whether it's previously incarcerated individuals or just, man off the street, which is kind of what we hire currently. Not just letting anybody take the role makes a whole lot of sense. The idea that people have proposed in the past, and it's in the questions further down, is talking about having like psych evals and things. And my pushback on that, and something we have to think about, is, man, it doesn't take long for that power trip to take over. And if we only look at if we just initially look at the Stanford prison experiment, it took 6 days to go from a college experiment about being a correctionals officer or an inmate for 6 days. It was supposed to be a 2 or 3 week experiment, and it lasted 6 days because it became too real for everyone involved, including the people pretending to be wardens, to where they had to call it off because it was getting dangerous. Like they saw where it was heading, and it only took 6 days. And that's, I don't want to call it pretend, because it got real. Like, there was people going on hunger strikes. Like there wasn't one of the participants who knew it was an experiment went on hunger strike on day 2 or 3. I don't remember exactly, but it was only 6 days. So it didn't take long. And it's like that, knowing that this was in the 70s, and it was at a college. So it was college age white men. So, there's a caveat there of, who was participating in the experiment. It, not a huge sample size, but it's something to consider. So we can't just say, hey, get a psych eval, because it's like, the people in that experiment were generally okay, and then they turned into a very bad situation very quickly. So not saying we shouldn't do psych evals, but I don't think that should be like the end all be all decision on whether or not somebody should be accepted into the position. So Chris, I appreciate you trying to treat them as human, because that's not currently what happens. At the very least, they are falling asleep on the job, which, if you haven't seen those videos, I have to find out if I can share them or not, because I have. Jolly made a good point. It's easy to lie in a psych eval, unfortunately, unless there's a follow-up with an actual psychologist. Yeah, and again, that adds an additional cost and time to get people in. So, and that's a huge concern currently, is fixing this as quickly and safely as possible. So, all right, so no other ideas, incentives, and potentially previously incarcerated individuals. I'm all for that. And if, whoever's taking over this task to look at this one, if you want to add some more info, we'll look at it and discuss it later. So we're talking about, up next, we're talking about skills with training and life prep classes. So something like balancing checkbooks, home ec classes, DIY to maintain your home classes to prepare individuals for when they're released, and job placement programs. I know those programs, at least some of them, exist currently. The problem that I understand of that is it's a very limited group that can get in because of the size of the classes, but also there's no incentive for people to want to join them, at least from what I'm hearing. Like, if let's give a hypothetical, you've got a 10-year sentence, why would you go to this class in year one? Like, there's no hope when you're in there and you have 10 years. Like, why would you care? And we have to find some way of adding some incentive in order for them to do the classes, other than just benefiting them, because it will, but we have to show that benefit. Elizabeth mentioned that the videos I was talking about for the guards falling asleep have been shared on social media. So if you haven't seen those, they're literally just sleeping on the job while inmates are at times being attacked and doing drugs and doing anything else just to take their mind off of the situation. So Elizabeth said that most programs aren't actually held, or they're not eligible to attend until they're closer to their parole or release eligibility. Yeah, so my concern is, how do we get them, even if we offer them, how do we get them to want to participate in those programs if we can't? Because I don't think we can give early release anymore. I think we changed that more than a few years ago. We used to give early release for participating in classes like that. I don't remember the name of it offhand. Let me write that down, because that was a class classes they used to offer. And Elizabeth, while I'm typing this, if you know the name of those classes, that would be great. Review classes that would take time off sentences. Cool. Honor and faith dorms have strong programs. They could be held or conducted, but they don't actually do them because of the staffing issues, and instead those dorms are filled with those struggling with drugs. Gotcha. Okay. So the places that they previously held them are being used to house extra inmates, or those that need to be separated because of drug use, trying to keep them from using drugs. Gotcha. Yeah, and it's hard to get in the programs. So I don't want them to be court ordered. That's part of my concern. So Jennifer on Facebook mentioned that it's hard to get, or next to impossible to get into court ordered programs. I want the programs to be enticing, and I don't know how to. I don't know how to do that. Jolly, go ahead.
So it might be wise to maybe offer like some situational upgrades, better access to, some privileges of some sort or something like that, or maybe even a better dormitory, something like that, something to be like, hey, if you do this, you get a little more. I mean, it's the same incentive in, capitalistic society.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll pay you more for this position. Hey, if you go through this class and you do these things, we can improve this crappy situation of being incarcerated and we can make it a little better, and we'll ensure that you're better prepared upon your release. I mean, as long as that is a true statement and it is not a lie,
Yeah.
then it would be an easy point to sell, and it would make their condition both mentally and physically better for them. While they're incarcerated, just offer to kind of upgrade their situation a little bit, give them a little more. I mean,
Okay.
we've all done it with our kids.
Yeah. We it's probably not too much TMI. It's fine. We potty trained our kids with candy. So we bribed them to use the bathroom and learn how to use the toilet by giving them candy. So anyway, let's see. Chris said his brother did classes. Can't remember the name, but it took money off, or took dollars off their fines. And actually, that is a great incentive. Reduce fines and fees based on participation. And then the other thing we have to deal with, which is something that is currently being misused, is people just being pushed through the system to make the numbers look better. So some type of third-party reporting, and again, we're speaking very loosely right now. That's the whole point of the meeting. But some type of third-party review of graduates, for lack of better terms at this point. So to guarantee, not guarantee, to for oversight. That's all. We'll figure out better words for it later. All right. Let's see. So could we look into making those more accessible? Is it because there aren't enough programs? The chat jumped up, so I'm trying to catch up where I was. Let's see. Judges order SAP or crime bill. ADOC gets federal funds for those programs. Okay, so we got to look into what percentage of funding is federal. So look into Fed funding for programs and how, if we're using it all. I have to assume that's no, but we got to look into it just in case. And then let's see. If we can make programs more accessible, what if, because there aren't enough programs, what if money was used to knock down fines instead of time off? Yeah, that's what we talked about. Cool. Yeah, you can't find money they receive from those programs in the budget. Okay, so Jennifer answered my next question. Awesome. That's where my head went. I kind of assumed it, but we'll keep looking. And then how about both? I'll let them out and give them money. If we can. I'm not sure we can just systematically reduce sentences. As governor, I can commute sentences, but that's not a realistic long-term goal. That's a tourniquet move, which I'm fine with short-term, but we got to find a long-term solution to keep this going. Let's see. I saw someone mention staffing of programs. Yeah. An ongoing issue that we're gonna have to deal with is staffing, and it's not money related, because there's plenty of money in this. It's getting people to actually work there, and it is a terribly dangerous place to work and or be housed, be forced to stay. So it's something we have to address. I have some ideas. We're going to talk about it a little bit tonight. Again, it's not a guarantee. We have to look into whether or not this is a possible option. So 20-year retirement, and actually show officers that I care. Yeah, we can give that a shot. We've got to make it somewhere safe for them to work first, though. We're in this weird spot where it's so dangerous nobody wants to work there, except the people who are, and I'm speaking blanket statement, I don't know any of the current corrections officers, but it seems like the only people who would want to work in the current situation are those who are desperate for money, or want the power trip that we were talking about earlier. So Historical Cat, there is a video on my website and social media about the lottery. Please check that one out. Let's see. You said instead, because Jared mentioned the bill was passed, so we may not be able to reduce something. Yeah, we used to offer programs that reduce sentences. I don't know if it's a law change or if it was just a policy, like internal policy change, something we had to look into, which means I need to make sure we look into it. Review options to reduce sentence for participation. in classes. And I have the name written down somewhere else from a call with somebody else, but I don't have it in front of me. I'll put that in the notes later. All right. Any other final thoughts on that before we move on to the next question? We've only got about 10 minutes, and there's no way we're going to hit all these questions. So staff/volunteers, I'm going to have you continue to look through these and just put in your thoughts on them, especially the ones that I don't have any thoughts on yet. We need to get something in there so we can start hashing out details. So let's see. No thoughts. So next one, sealing records and rights reinstatement. Once their time is finished, perhaps they haven't committed any other crimes in a period of time, 5 to 10 years is what's mentioned. They can apply to have their records sealed and their rights reinstated. Rights reinstated, there's already a process. If we're going to change that, it is a legislative issue, so the legislature will have to actually pass law to change that, unless an executive order can override it. That I'm looking into. What I wrote is we need some legal advice on that one, because that sounds, I don't know what sealing records looks like from a legal standpoint and when that's okay to do and when it's not. So if anybody has any legal counsel that they can send our way, we will gladly take some insight onto that one. Review rights restoration and executive orders. So I have no problem doing that if it is a solution. I just feel like it's not. Yeah, Jennifer makes a good point. And if you're not familiar, the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles has done a large inverted switch between granting pardons and paroles and denying them. So something like 20% denial before 2018 to a 20% approval in 2019 or so. So it's been a huge switch in the last few years. So there's a group called Restore My Vote that's helping people know when their rights have been reinstated because the state does not alert anyone. That's a good point, Amanda. There's also a giant pool of people who received those rights, which is kind of think what Amanda's pointing at. Look that up, because there's a bunch of people that now have their rights and the state just didn't tell them. Let's see, Chris. Good idea. It shouldn't take $20,000 to get a record removed. Yeah, you shouldn't have to pay that after a certain period of time. I generally would agree with that. If it's been a bit and you're not getting back into the same situation, then why let that be held against you? That seems like an extended punishment for a crime that you've already served your time for. Let's see. Do I have any policy on helping military veterans? I don't currently. We're focusing on prison currently. So Historical Cat, if you will go to the link in my bio and put in a feedback form, we will definitely try to cover that later. I don't have anything to give you right now. And Taylor, you're doing your job. Dang it, I should let you do that. There are actually incarcerated citizens that are eligible to vote. So you can actually still have your rights to vote if you're there, depending on what crime you committed. So there's only about 63 that take away your rights to vote. The rest of them you can still vote while you're incarcerated. So good point. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, so we're going to move on. Overcrowding and safety. This is the one I want to get to before we end. We have about 6 minutes. So have you had any forethought to lay out a plan for how to deal with the safety issues for both inmates and guards alike stemming from overcrowding? If so, what are the most immediate concerns aside from the obvious that you feel needs to be addressed first? This is going to be started with a giant caveat of this is the only thing that I have looked into that seems realistic to help solve the current overcrowding and dangers of being in our prisons currently. That involves declaring a state of emergency and bringing in the National Guard to help add oversight and additional workforce into the prisons themselves. And that does not mean replacing everybody who's there necessarily, but initially it's bringing them in as oversight and supplemental help. So what I have in here is we need about 3,500 staff to staff the Alabama Department of Corrections per the most recent research. And that is currently sitting at about 1,000 people per the most recent estimates because we don't have firm numbers. In fact, there are people who are currently trying to get an accurate count. I'll say it that way. We have about 9,500 enlisted National Guardsmen, so it's not like we have to take the entire National Guard and call everybody in, but bringing in a few hundred at least, potentially up to 2,000 to staff our prisons. And that the reason I'm wanting to go National Guard is twofold. A, I can call them in, so that's within my control, but also that lets us have some oversight that people can't just get away with pushing things under the rug and sweeping things under the rug, because now you're involving the military, and there are some requirements that they have to do and follow that citizens don't. So, Alice, yes, state of emergency because we have thousands upon thousands of people, tens of thousands, 26,000 or so, that are currently in danger every day. So that's everything I can read about the declaring a state of emergency. It falls within that realm, and the National Guard's within my control. So if somebody has a better plan, let's hear it. But I'm not sure that there is one. I haven't seen one. So again, not saying it's the definite plan, but it's something I'm looking into very seriously because it's the one thing that it looks like would help. Jennifer makes a good point. What do you think the DOJ is going to do? I don't think of National Guard because that's up to me, but bringing in federal officers to take over just like they did in the 80s. Yeah, for sure. Chris said you've helped run a 1,200 person prison with 15 officers. Like, please hear this. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many people that don't know how bad it is right now. Like we're going to end on this one. There's a whole bunch more questions, and we'll go through and look at those individually after the live ends. But like we kind of have to. I can't not say something. The state of our prisons currently are the worst in the world. Like they are in the industrialized world. I'll say that because I can't speak to everywhere, but we literally have some of the worst prisons, to the point where our federal government is suing our state in 2024. We have to wait 2 years for that to happen, but it's not the first time it's happened. So if you're not familiar, it happened in the 70s, and the federal government actually took over our prisons then also. And like that could happen again. So rather than waiting for the federal government to be forced to do so, why not do it first? Like, I haven't found a better solution. So I'm saying this in earnest. If you have a better idea other than declaring the state of emergency that is currently in our state and bringing in the National Guard, I'd love to hear it. So let's do it. Jennifer makes a good point. We are currently we're thought of as a third world country by international standards. The only reason we're not declared that broadly is because we are a part of the United States. So yeah. If you go looking for the current state of Alabama prisons, please be aware that you're going to see things that you probably aren't expecting. I mean, it's literally 75 to 90% of our incarcerated individuals are using drugs, and it is to keep their mind off of the situation, right? Like it just, you're locked up for I'm going to say unknown amounts of time, because you can always get your sentence extended. But why, if you have access, why wouldn't you take your mind off the nothing to do, sitting in a box, but do drugs? Like, I don't blame them for doing it at all. I wish there was a safer way for them to get their mind off of it. But I wish we could speak one-on-one, give you a lot of information. Chris, you can, and Taylor is mentioning that right now. You can literally schedule a meeting on my website. So anybody else who's seeing this and I've asked for help and you have input and you didn't want to put it in the comments, or I somehow overlooked it, or you're seeing this after the fact, you can go to my website and schedule a meeting with me directly. I would prefer to do them publicly, so it's conversations like this that can happen. If you're giving out information that would put your life in danger, or as personal health information you don't want to put out, I respect that and can have a private meeting. There's an option. Pick private, pick public. I would prefer public if you can. So that invite is open. It literally goes straight on my calendar. You don't have to go through my campaign manager. You don't have to go through anybody else. it looks at my availability and schedules a meeting. So that is wide open for anyone anyone who cares about Alabama. Whether you live here or not, if you care about the state, I would love to hear from you, especially if you have insight. So I think we can wrap up there. It's now 8 o'clock. I've taken about an hour of everybody's time. I thoroughly appreciate everybody jumping in. This meeting has gone really well. Wish we could have gotten to the other questions, because I think we may have hit maybe a fourth of the questions. Some of them repeat and some of them are related, but we've only hit about a fourth of the questions that are in this list. So I have my work cut out before August 3rd. And if anybody who's going to be in that town hall is here, I'm thinking about your questions earnestly and trying to find actual answers for you. So I appreciate you giving me your time. Y'all have a good rest of the night. I am going to go eat my dinner that I have not had yet.